My name is Magnus Bäck. I work with CI tools and other tools at Access Communications, and I'm filling in for Tobias Persson, who unfortunately fell ill, so he couldn't do this talk. So I'm going to talk about accessing an event repository. So we talked about event repositories in an earlier session, so let's do a little recap. An event repository or an ER is a collection of all the Eiffel events that have been sent on the bus. They're stored in a persistent manner, not necessarily forever. You could certainly do cleanups, but for a sufficient amount of time, and it allows historical lookups of past events, and also downstream, upstream lookups, meaning you start with one event and you either you follow the links and search backwards in time or forwards in time. In other words, you want to find events that link to the event you're interested in. So there are many reasons why we would want to have an event repository. As a consumer, reacting on a single event is pretty easy. You just set up a consumer, and when you receive the event, you look at the event and decide, is this interesting? If so, take action. For example, if an artifact has been created, you can publish that artifact, assuming you have the information needed to fill in the artifact published event. If you receive an artifact published event, you might want to start the tests. Although you might not be able to know from the artifact published event if you're actually interested in the artifact. But if you are, you can start the test and download the artifacts files. But with the nature of Eiffel, where data isn't duplicated between events, it's a pretty pure design in that sense. But the problem with it is that it really relies on having those links. So very often you will get an event, and that might be a potential trigger of doing some other action, but you need more information. As in the example with the artifact published event, you only get the URI or URIs of that artifact. You don't know the identity of the artifact. You don't know if the artifact was produced from an activity that you care about, for example. So somehow you need to walk backwards in time and look at past events to figure out whether you should actually take any action. Now you could of course do this by implementing a consumer that listens to not only the trigger event but also other events, and build up state internally about things that you are interested in. And thereby, when the trigger event comes, you can just look up in memory and figure out whether to take some kind of action. You could use some kind of streaming framework for this: Apache Beam, Apache Flink, Spark, and so on. But it gets kind of heavy. You could write the code by hand, but as always with persistence and so on, and distributed systems where you might want to run multiple instances, things get pretty involved rather quickly. So it's much easier to just act on the trigger event directly. And also, if you rely solely on events that you have received and you're building a cache of possibly interesting events, if you're starting up a new service, your cache will be empty. So you won't have anything to fall back to. But those are things that an event repository solves for us. And of course, you can also use it to answer other questions that are related to metrics, or that sort of an end user might want to know for some reason, like which tests did we actually run on this build or this artifact? Where was it published? Where can I find it? Do we have confidence to release this build, and so on. So an event repository definitely has its place. One can imagine also a hybrid solution to solve the problem I mentioned earlier with the empty cache. So you could have can be continuously listening to events, caching them, and if you get a cache miss, you would have to look up the event in the event repository. That has also the advantage that you won't place an undue burden on the event repository, because looking up every single event of a particular type could result in hundreds or thousands of queries per second, and that's probably not a great idea to be doing. In the case of an artifact published event, for example, if you need the identity of the artifact to figure out whether to act, you would have to look up every single artifact published event that's being received, and those could be many events. And it gets even worse if you want to track back to the activity that produced the artifact, if you need that information to figure out whether you're actually interested. So let's talk about a few options for event repository implementations. First of all, we have sort of the original ER, Ericsson's internal ER. There is a Docker image that has been published, but the code is still proprietary. And documentation for the Docker image isn't fantastic. And it provides a REST API for performing various kinds of queries against historical event data. You also have upstream, downstream searches given a particular event ID. And this API is supported both by Eiffel RemRem and Eiffel Intelligence, I think. RemRem uses it to look up events for your links. So you don't have to, if you want to send an event that links to something, you don't have to yourself have knowledge about the event repository. You can express that I want to link to the event with some attribute having this value. And that's also another great reason for having an event repository, for producers to easily map between sort of their domain onto the Eiffel domain. If you have a commit ID, a repository name, the URI of an artifact, the name of a project, or something like that, sort of in the real world domain, but you can't set up links to those. You need the IDs of the Eiffel events that represent them, and you need to look that up. Everyone can't be a consumer of events and build that event cache that I talked about earlier. So I have a hard time imagining any Eiffel deployment without an event repository. All right, but back to the event repository alternatives. So this is one option, perhaps. Another one that's supposed to be compatible is Eiffel Goer, which Tobias recently has initiated, and I'm also one of the maintainers. So it's an open source implementation of the same API, or, well, technically it's a subset of the API. We're looking into publishing the event repository API from Ericsson's implementation as a sort of reference API, so that both event repository implementations and client implementations can use this specification. It's an open API spec. The goal of Goer is to work with RemRem and Intelligence and basically be a drop-in replacement, we hope, even though it might not support all the corner case features. Well, what we think is corner case anyway. It's written in Go. It builds upon MongoDB, but it's written to be adaptable to any kind of database, really. I think we have there's certainly some scaffolding up. I think we support one endpoint right now, but it's not optimized or anything. Doesn't support all the endpoints, and then various things need to come into place. But that's something we're going to deploy internally at Axis as soon as it becomes in sufficiently good shape. A third option with a completely different API is the Eiffel Graphql API, which was developed quite a while ago. So obviously it uses a GraphQL API. It's written in Python and also has MongoDB as the backing database. Probably, yeah, you can probably adapt it to other databases as well, but it'll take some work. It's not compatible with really anything but Ethos, the test orchestrator. I can, apart from performing straight up queries, you can also do upstream downstream here. So I'm just going to show briefly what it could look like. This goes pretty small, but a query could look like this, where you start with a particular identity and you indicate what links you want to follow, what events you're interested in. So we're following a context link, an activity triggered, and so on and so forth. And you get this back. So as opposed to the REST API, you can make a single call and get all the interesting results back. So in a way, it's more convenient, but I guess also a little bit more difficult to start to use. And speaking of SDKs, the results that you get back aren't literally the event payloads. So these results can't be fed into some kind of Eiffel Events SDK. So that's another drawback. You have to either build your own representations of the GraphQL responses, which of course could be auto-generated from the GraphQL schema, but it's, yeah, you have to decide for yourself what you want to use. Which brings us to which one should you use? Well, so there are two major types, the one with the official Eiffel community REST APIs, and you have the GraphQL API. If you're using Ethos, which not everyone does, you only have the GraphQL API to choose from. You have to use it currently. And apparently you want to use one of the official REST APIs as well. I'm not sure if Ethos uses both actually, or if it's just you want to use the REST API for other things. Anyway, Eiffel Goer and the GraphQL API would work on the same MongoDB setup, so it would be easy to use them as companion APIs, and that's fine. If you're not using Ethos, you should probably go with Eiffel Goer or the Ericsson's Event Repository. And I think that was the last slide. Any questions or comments?
I would be interesting to hear from, I know there are a lot of Ericsson people on the call now, and you who are working more with the event repository in production as a service within Ericsson, what issues would you see? I mean, if we would look into using this Goer instead in Ericsson, for example, could you help us out somehow to understand what could be the problems, not specifically to just switch out to something else, but what are the main problems we've seen in Ericsson on an event repository? I mean, it comes to maybe load or scalability or whatever things. I mean, if we would then now contribute to Goer as well and start using that maybe instead and help out to make the best event repository together with everyone else in the community, what things should we then look into? What problem areas should we try to tackle and investigate? Do we have any such input from anyone in Ericsson here?
Hello, yeah, Kenneth here. Yeah, so like when you talk about the event repository, like a lot of time, like we do really have like some problem that like we have different Eiffel domain, and then like each Eiffel domain that we have like cover a lot of messages, you know. So sometimes like the filter, like when you try to do the searching, and then it's kind of like taking a lot of time. You know, like it depends on the size of the event repository. So sometimes like you want to find like the upstream like of one event or the downstream of one event, then like it might be like taking like 20 minutes and now hanging there like before you really see the event. So and then also like yeah, so I think like this is the like one of the main problem that I see like is like we have like too many events like in year.
Yeah, I guess that maybe brings me to comment on the external event repositories that is also possible to use in the Eiffel Event Repository, the Ericsson solution, where we can somehow connect different event repositories to each other. So if one event is not found in the event repository you are looking at, then that event repository could itself query in the backend towards another event repository that is configured. How would that work with Goer, you think, Magnus? Is that some option there as well if you would have different Goer deployments for different domains, for example? Would it then be possible to connect those in a similar way, you think?
Yeah, I don't think that would be a problem. One difference I think is that I think you guys are using a single collection for all events. Is that true?
I'm not too sure how it's been implemented because I usually when I try to search on the ER like I just like there's like an interface on the web browser. You just type something, you know, on the address bar, then like then you know some of the query at the address bar, then like it will give you the event. So that's how we usually use it.
Yeah. Because Goer, just like GraphQL API, uses one MongoDB collection per event type, which has a few consequences. It's a little bit annoying if you, in the GraphQL API case, you always state what you're looking for. I mean, that's what you start with. I want to search for an activity created, and then you provide those. So then it's very easy. You know right away what collection you want to go to. If you're just searching for based on the meta ID, for example, you certainly have to search through 23 collections potentially to find that ID. So that's something that we're going to be doing in parallel. It certainly wouldn't be hard to sort of have peering set up between different Goer instances, where just like we're looking up in different collections in parallel, we would also fire away a call to another, so that the Goer backend also is a Goer client. That would be totally doable.
Interesting. Just something to note here. When you have these pairing setups and you have a set of different groups of developers working in a similar way, let's say you're interested in being able to query 3 other people's domains, and those domains are also interested in querying your events in this pairing ER setup that you have. And especially with this parallel query execution that you're discussing, you will almost immediately run out of compute resources when multiple queries are run simultaneously. You will very quickly run into the sort of physical I/O per second limits of the underlying storage system in terms of how fast you can actually process these queries. I think that this is something that this is a really difficult problem to solve, and I think that the solution currently within Ericsson, it's functional, but it needs to be much better, really. But I think these pairing setups are not necessarily the way to go. Maybe having copied databases would be like a ugly hack, but also functional to avoid the sort of cascading queries and so on. But this is definitely something where a lot of thinking has to be done if there's to be work on a community ER that is functional for all the use cases, or not all the use cases, but for the broad use case, I suppose.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I'm wondering if you'd done any experiments with other databases. I mean, I'm sure your ER is big, but I mean, it's there are loads of databases that are probably 2 orders of magnitude bigger and provide better response time. So there's, yeah, I just wonder what the right path forward would be.
It's very. I don't think it's something we can really just figure out here, unfortunately.
No, of course not. No.
But yeah, I do think. I mean, I've been something that I was always curious about. I know yesterday during the sort of startup sessions, it was mentioned that typically they are document or graph databases that are chosen for the ER. But in my head, while I haven't done any experimenting with this, the Eiffel protocol design seems very relational to me with how the links work. So you have these foreign keys essentially, which are the events that are the links. So that's something that could be explored, but I'm not a database expert, so I'm just sort of mentioning that this is something that's a bit tricky, and I think a lot of work has to go into to get it performant in high load scenarios, especially when you're talking about a deployment when you have sort of separate ERs for separate subgroups of developers.
We have made some master theses actually in Ericsson on different event database backends. And unfortunately, I think we haven't maybe published those open source, but or maybe we have published some of them, but I don't really know. And it's a few years back now. But I remember one thing that was actually quite interesting in the last one I heard about was the Arango DB solution, which is a combined, or it's called multi-whatever backend database. So it can be seen both as a graph database and a document database. So more or less taking the best of 2 worlds, or almost the best of 2 worlds. So making upstream, downstream queries very quick through the Graph API to that database, and also making property filtering and matching quick using the document-based indexed version of the database API somehow. And that's something I think we should explore more. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to follow that up in Ericsson after that thesis was made too much. But I still think that's an option as well. And I think we can join forces here and make a very good solution together on these things. And it's very valuable, I think, for the experience we have in Ericsson from our event repository. If we could share that experience with Axis and make a very good repository together here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, our setup is so far, a very, very small and cute one compared to what you guys have. So we could certainly look into master theses. We usually have 1 or 2 going at a time. So maybe something we could do during the spring or something. Apart from Arango, we have dgraph, which is also a graph database with a GraphQL API. So that would be another option as well to look into. And of course, Neo4j, but it's not open source. I think there have been some experiments earlier there.
I know that Neo4j was part of that master thesis that we had as well. And I think that it has very good, of course, graph performance, but quite lousy indexed search performance. So if you would search for a specific event ID, for example, in that database, it takes forever to find it.
But Neo4j is it's not like open source, because they have some license. Then they have limited performance. If you are only using the free version. So I'm not too sure that when you did the testing, you did the commercial one or just the community version. So they might have a different performance. We are using OrientDB, the graph database as well. and then like yeah, for like finding the event relations like between, but like we are not doing I mean we are working with a tool called Flux, you know, like but that tool is not really like an event repository, but like we are doing the like finding the connection between different events to calculate the lead time and stuff like that. So yeah, ORMDB can be an option as well, but like they have some stability issue as well. Yeah.
Matthias just pasted a link in the chat on if you want to say that, Matthias. But the master thesis I was talking about, where HVAX actually investigated RangoDB and Neo4j together with MongoDB. These three were evaluated, and there is information on that.
So that's what that repository is all about.
Yes.
Just a quick one, you asked Emil there. Security is very high up on Ericsson's list, so that would also be a thing that we can authenticate and plug it into everything, so we know that people are allowed to fetch stuff.
Right. Great. Any more final comments?
Awesome initiative. Sounds like it's going to be a huge success.
I hope you're joining. Nice.
If there are no more comments or questions, thank you very much, Magnus, for jumping in here.